Hi there. You're listening to the Voice with Action podcast. I am your host, Deb Balico.
And I am Rebecca Pratt, co-founder and president of Orphan Relief and Rescue. Tune in to be awakened and inspired to take action towards what you were created to do in this world, to live fully alive.
Welcome to the Voice with Action podcast. For those of you who aren't familiar with Orphan Relief and Rescue, we're a nonprofit dedicated to fighting abuse, neglect, and trafficking of children in West Africa. We operate in rural villages where parents can traffic their children due to hunger. We've successfully rescued hundreds of children from slavery, abuse, and early marriage by enrolling them in our school and feeding program. We also support parents through our savings and loans program to help them start businesses to provide for their families. I'm here with Rebecca Pratt, president and co-founder of Orphan Relief and Rescue. Rebecca, why are you excited to start this podcast?
Yeah, there's so many crazy, amazing God stories every day. We are hearing about what God is doing. We're experiencing what God is doing. And we just really want people to come into the doors of what we're doing and just really get a feel for the beautiful God stories and the wow moment. Within our staff, we're always telling the stories, and we call it the wow Mao, which is in a tribal language of Fawn. Mao is translated as God in the Fawn language. Our staff is always saying wow Mao, everywhere they go. And it's wow God moments. We're wanting to do this podcast to share those wow God moments and God stories. Just really give the glory to God in this and encourage and inspire people in their own walks with the Lord. And our hope with this podcast is really that people will be inspired in their own life, that they will get a glimpse of Jesus in a way that they've never seen before or haven't maybe even experienced before. God just becomes so big when we hear all of these beautiful things. And so, yeah, our hope is that people will be inspired, ignited, and excited in their walk with Jesus.
Jumping right in, how did Orphan Relief and Rescue get started back in 2005?
Yeah, it started with my family and I living on a hospital ship with an organization called Mercy Ships. We lived in Africa for 2 years. We just started helping on the side with some orphanage scenarios and feeding hungry kids. There was a young adult team that was upcountry. We were overseeing. There was an orphanage with 109 kids that literally were dying in this orphanage. And it was 3 hours upcountry. And after witnessing these horrific situations with these kids, the team didn't know what to do. They kept emailing and saying, please advise us. What should we do? Don't know what we can do to save these kids. And after going and seeing them personally, I was completely in distress after seeing that. I went back to the ship. I have my 3 beautiful kids sleeping in their little bunk beds, and they have plenty of clothes in the closet. They don't lack anything. The kids that I had just seen were sleeping on mat floors on the floor. There was a whole graveyard in the backyard. Even the team that was working there didn't even realize that there was a graveyard in the backyard. And the only reason I knew that is because when I was touring around, I saw like these stick crosses in the ground in the backyard. And I asked the director, I said, what's this? And he said, oh, well, that's where the children, when they die, that's where they're buried. And I said, well, why aren't there names on those sticks, crosses? And he said, well, because we don't want the kids to see the names of their friends on them. We mourn that child for a day, and then we don't talk about that child anymore. That way it's not as sad for their friends. There was a little boy named Fabrice that caught my attention. He strutted like a little king. He was maybe 3 years old at the time, and he had his hands behind his back with a big descended stomach full of worms and malnourishment. And he had a gold tattered African outfit on. And it just reminded me of like a king. He looked like royalty, strutting around, lethargic, and hollow eyes, no life in his eyes. His eyes are what haunted me when I went back to that ship. I couldn't sleep for like 5 days. I literally was sleepless. I felt like I had to figure out how to help these kids. So I called all these organizations that were Western organizations working in that country. I was asking them, please, will you help these kids? They're dying kids, and you advertise that you help them. Every single one of them said, I'm sorry, we can't help that type of situation. It's like a big black hole for your money. And we don't touch those type of situations. And I was like, but these kids are dying. Like, you guys advertise, you help the dying. And I'm telling you where the dying are. I was pretty passionate about what I'd just seen. Call after call, I was turned down with no one that would help them. I really felt like after the 5 days, I felt like God was saying, Rebecca, I want you to go and help them. And I was like, okay, our family has no money. We're in missions, full-time missions. We have to raise our own support, barely make our own bills. It was like, God, I wasn't going to say yes, number one, because I was like, this is too big. This is a situation too big. And yet God formulated this whole plan over these 5 sleepless nights, a whole plan of like a 2-year plan of removing the kids from their current situation, because it was a rented facility, into a nice rented building for them where the girls would have one section, the boys would have another. There was also planned to drop off food once a month for them and have running water and toilets and everything that they didn't have in their rented facility. They were literally walking a mile each way to get water and just hauling these 5-gallon jugs, a mile there, a mile back. These tiny little bodies, we were seeing them haul these jugs. This whole plan came to mind, and it was a $16,000 2-year plan. By the 5th sleepless night, I was so delirious, and I was like, God, if this is you, then I need you to, there was point A, point B, point C, point D. There was 4 things that I needed God to accomplish to prove to me that it was him. Number 1, my boss on the ship would have to let me go. There was a doctor who was a translator on the ship, and I thought if he could come and do evaluations on all the kids and translate at the same time, then I would consider this being a yes. There were 4 different specific things. It's actually the 6th morning of my 5 sleepless nights. God literally did every single thing that I needed. It was basically a 10-day plan to go and stay up with the team that was up there, stay for 10 days and try to implement this whole thing. As I was driving with this translator doctor, as we were driving in the taxi, his name's Dr. Carell, and I said, Dr. Carell, this is crazy because literally we have no money. I don't know how this would ever work. I literally am just saying, God, here's my hands, here's my feet, and here's my voice. You do what only you can do. And I told Dr. Carell, I said, worst case scenario, this whole thing flops, nothing works, and these kids are no better off than when we saw them first. So I said, there's really no drawback here besides we're wasting a little bit of time if it doesn't work. He's like, yeah, I'll just come and check up all the kids and translate, do whatever you need. God did the miraculous. God provided literally $22,000 in 5 days. There was a Peace Corps, 2 Peace Corps workers that were working in that orphanage as well. They couldn't touch any money, so they couldn't raise money for that home. And when I came in and shared the plan with them, they said, oh my goodness, our parents have been dying to give money towards helping these kids, and they've had no avenue to do that. So their parents each gave $5,000 each. And just one thing after the next, I sent out some emails, and God provided this $22,000. We were able to set up this 2-year plan, move the kids all into this beautiful 2 buildings in a compound area. God showed me how big he was. It was unbelievable what God did. The whole story is in my first book, Inspired to Action, how following the promptings of your heart can change the world. And that was really the beginning of seeing God can do the impossible with nothing, literally nothing, except our hands, our feet, and our mouthpiece. And it was the biggest faith jumpstart of my life, really. And it really was the beginning of God birthing Orphan Relief and Rescue without even me realizing it at that time. That time, just saving kids' lives. And there's a quote by George Mueller, and it says, faith does not operate in the realm of the possible. There is no glory for God in that which is humanly possible. Faith begins where man's power ends. The scripture, Matthew 28:20 says, and surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. God is with us in all of these things. When God asks us to do these things, that is where we have to either say yes or no. My theory with this was like what I said to Dr. Carell. We could walk forward and try, and nothing might happen. And we may just fall on our face and give up 10 days of our life. Or God could come through and literally 109 kids are saved, and God could do the miraculous. And so we're just giving God the opportunity to do what only he could do. And in my mind, I really didn't see the reality that this would come to pass. And so when it did, I realized this is God's work. Like, this is what God's business is, doing the supernatural, using the ordinary people to do the extraordinary through accomplishing his perfect will in these things. And the title of my book, Inspired to Action, How Following the Promptings of Your Heart Can Change the World. I've realized that when he prompts our hearts to do things in front of us, to come along the lines of redeeming, restoring, or rescuing, that is when, if we say yes, we are literally just in partnership accomplishing God's perfect will through our life, because he's looking to and fro to accomplish his perfect will, and he's choosing to use our human involvement to bring about his perfect will. So it's been a pretty crazy ride since, and that was, the beginning really of God birthing Orphan Relief and Rescue without realizing that was the birthing story of this. And today, Fabrice is 23 years old. He loves Jesus. He's thriving. It's just precious to see what God has done in this young man's life. It all started way back then.
Really sounds like you, and your learning to say yes to God is where it built your faith, so that you can continue to say yes as he's asked you and stretched you, continued to call you into Orphan Relief and Rescue. Because I know you've told me that this was not at all where you thought that God wanted you to be, that you in your mind wanted to continue doing work in Central America, not in West Africa. But God kept inviting you and kept saying, are you willing to say yes? Do you trust me? And it really is an amazing testimony.
God knows us better than we know ourselves. I'm a missionary kid. Background was Mexico and Central America. And I always thought that would be where I ended up. It's kind of shocking that it's Africa and it's French speaking and it's a whole different world that God has brought me in. But I have come alive in a way that I never, ever dreamed I would come alive, because I am right in the center of his will. And it is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And yet it's the most beautiful thing I've ever done in my life as well. Besides having my kids and raising my kids and having grandkids. And I feel like the bonus, that's the legacy and the other beauty that God allows us to experience. But this work in ministry with Orphan Relief and Rescue work has been unbelievable in the spirit realm of what God has done and what he continues to do.
How would you encourage others who might be stuck and having a hard time saying yes to God or trusting God? Or
God is trustworthy. He knows us better than we know ourselves. And if he's prompting you to do something that is along the lines of rescuing, redeeming, or restoring, then really take some time to ask the Lord if this is really what he wants you to do. Like I did, I put 4 things together that God had to accomplish to bring that to pass. Now, what was interesting is I didn't say he needed to provide the money before. People always say, well, was one of your 4 things the money? And I said, no, actually it wasn't. It was just practical things. It was getting a translator because I knew I had to do that, and getting permission from the different people I needed to get permission from that I didn't think would let me off of my job description. And putting a little few points together of asking the Lord to show you through these different things that you can petition to him to show you, and then watch him work and see what he'll do. But as we walk forward in those promptings, I feel like if it's a bigger thing for me, obviously the orphanage work was a bigger thing, and having no money was also a very crazy stretching thing. But it was looking at the worst case scenario. What's the worst thing that could happen? Us go and then we fail and we come back and okay, well, these kids weren't saved. But if it succeeds, how many more people will be rescued and saved? And yeah, giving God the opportunity to work is key in our life as we step forward to just start seeing these small yeses that turn into a little bit bigger yeses. It just increases our faith. And that's really how it began with me, is learning to say yes to the things that God, I don't say yes right away. I always kind of, I have to have a little bit of sleepless nights and a little bit of pondering. But if I'm agitated in my spirit and I know that God is gnawing at my heart, then I stop and I really listen. For me, for this one, it took 5 sleepless nights, and it doesn't take as long now. Now it's like one sleepless night, and then I go to prayer and I'm like, okay, God, did you wake me up because of such and such? And is this why I'm supposed to do such and such? So I'm a lot quicker to listen now.
It is amazing to think little Fabrice, 3 years old, God saw him. God saw him. He saw his name. He saw even the sense of his dream and destiny. He was a key in the spiritual world as a king. God wanted to provide for him, and he wanted to use you, and he wanted to use then Orphan Relief and Rescue to continue to invest in his life and bring him to where he is today. So can you fill us in a little more of where he is today? Because I know recently you got to see him and he was wearing our Name, Dream, Destiny bracelet. And it's kind of that moment when you were talking to him.
Yes. So I was meeting with him. He always wants to update me on his life. So he's finished high school and mechanic apprenticeship. He is now one of our Orphan Relief and Rescue drivers. He's driving our team to and from the field, as well as he is able to work on our vehicles as well as they break down. And his dream is to have his own shop one day, his mechanic shop. But he's just learning how to live life as a 23-year-old young man. He lives on his own now. And yeah, it's really sweet. So he was sitting across from me. He had his Name, Dream, Destiny Orphan Relief and Rescue bracelet on. It's like these rubber bracelets that have the letters on them, or the words on them. And he had his hand up on his chin talking to me. And I noticed the bracelet on his wrist, and it was faced towards me, the word destiny on that bracelet. And as we're talking, he's just telling me about his life. And I literally had this aha moment of, oh my gosh. I said, okay, stop right there. I said, I need to take a picture of like this stance right here. Because I said, here I am talking to you. This is 20 years later. You're 23. And God is literally reminding me that 20 years ago, he had a destiny for you. And that destiny would not have been fulfilled had someone not said yes to walk forward and to help save your life and all these other kids' lives. With tears in my eyes, I was just like, this was like one of those God moments that the Lord was just showing me. And he didn't plan it. I didn't even know he had a bracelet. One of our staff members gave him one of these Orphan Relief and Rescue bracelets. And he also had a teddy bear on his shirt. And I was like, this is crazy to just look, because I remember the little boy. And so I was seeing it through that little boy's eyes again. And now I'm looking at these bright-eyed adult man that God has totally redeemed, restored, and rescued. And it was just beautiful to see a full circle moment right in front of me. It's beautiful.
To think that it was everything over the last 20 years, it's all been worth it, even if it was just for Fabrice, even for the one. Orphan Relief and Rescue has changed thousands of kids' lives and entire communities. But God, he's always about the one. Even he would have given up everything, gone to the cross for one person. And to think that 20 years of life work was even just for Fabrice, it would have been worth it. But it's not just been for Fabrice. There are thousands, entire communities have been transformed because of Wow Mao, God doing amazing work. Tune in next week to hear more amazing God stories and more of how God might be speaking to you. Thank you for listening to the Voice with Action podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, would you consider sharing or subscribing to this podcast and leave a 5-star review to help us grow? If you want to reach us or help us end child trafficking in West Africa, go to orphanreliefandrescue.org. That's orphanreliefandrescue.org. See you next week.